Our second reading is from Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. We continue in Mark tonight, or this morning. Don't tell anyone, shh. We continue in Mark as we've been reading the Gospel of Mark. And in this couple of verses, we're going to see Jesus hard at work. I invite you to listen now for God's word. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let's go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I remember several years ago, one night I was at my friend Bill's wedding rehearsal. After it had ended, we were riding home, riding back to his apartment, and his roommate was driving. And this was in Seattle. It was a good thing his roommate was driving because I didn't know the town. I didn't know my way around anywhere. But his roommate was driving, and for some reason that I couldn't ever fully understand, he was in a terrible hurry. He was just flooring it. He was, pedal to the metal, stomping on the gas, stomping on the brake, every intersection. We were just speeding through as fast as we could, and it just kept getting faster and faster and faster, and I kept getting more and more uncomfortable, and I was kind of just sitting there hoping we would hit red lights so we could slow down. Finally, I just had to shout, hey, what's the hurry, man? Slow down. In Mark's gospel, when you get in the car with Jesus, you're going to feel the same kind of thing. There's this sense that once we cast in, we cast in our lots with Jesus, that we've got to buckle up and hold on tight because he is moving, and he is not going to slow down. You might have caught some of that sense from the reading today from Mark. In just 10 short verses, we ran through 4 different scenes. Simon Peter's mother-in-law at home, and then Jesus healing the crowds at Capernaum, and then Jesus praying before dawn the next day, and then the crew of disciples moving out and heading back onto the road to continue their mission, their journey, bringing the good news to others. As they arrived in Simon Peter's house, they found his mother-in-law sick with a fever. And maybe our first reaction is, oh no, a little fever, so what? But we have to remember, in the ancient world, a little fever is not a so what. It's a big deal. A little fever might be enough to do you in. There are no vaccines back then. This is no take 2 Tylenol, call me in the morning kind of situation. A little fever could be a matter of life and death. And so Peter's mother-in-law, we have to understand, has really been laid low here, and she genuinely might not recover. She is trapped by this fever. And so Jesus comes in, he takes her by the hand, he raises her up, and he makes her well. And, the ancient Hebrews may not have had all of our medical understanding that we have today, but they did understand social distancing. They understood communicable diseases. And they had some pretty smart and specific rules for avoiding infection. Going into a sick person's room? No. Sitting on their bed? And taking them by the hand? Absolutely not. These are all violations of quarantine. We get that now. We know how you shouldn't be doing that, but Jesus did. None of that stopped Jesus. He went into her room. He came close to her. He raised her up. He took her by the hand. And when he raised her up, the word Mark uses is significant. It's krateo, and that's the same word that will be used to describe what happens to Jesus after 3 days in the tomb, when he is raised up. So there's a hint of the resurrection story. It's almost a foreshadowing or pay attention. Life is being restored here. And that really helps me make sense of what happens next, because the text says that this woman gets up and starts serving them. And if you read it in one way, that's kind of problematic. That sounds pretty chauvinistic. Here she is at death's door, and Simon and his buddies come barging in, and Jesus heals her, and they send her back to the kitchen to start making them snacks. Well, that's not really what I think happened. To me, this text has more of a sense of liberation. When Jesus heals her, Peter's mother-in-law is set free from her illness, set free from the threat of death, and she chooses to respond in service. It's like, do you know anybody who has the gift of hospitality? Somebody who just loves to take care of people when they come to visit, who maybe even feels compelled to kind of roll out the welcome wagon. They just can't help themselves. That can be a genuine vocation for some people, and I get the feeling that the mother-in-law was one of these people. To be sick, invalid, unable to welcome the guests who come into your home and to care for them would pain her very soul. And so making her well again would necessarily include her regaining the ability to do what she loves to do, to take care of others, to serve others. And so that's what happens when Jesus heals her. And I love this. The Greek word for what she does is diakone. Now, do you hear in that the same root as our officer word, deacon? There's an argument to be made in Mark's gospel that this is the first of Jesus' real disciples, because she's the first one who actually acts like it, who actually seems to get it. The 4 brothers heard Jesus call at the lakeshore, and they came along with him. They dropped their nets and went with Jesus. But Simon's mother-in-law is the first person in the gospel to really follow Jesus by mimicking his actions, by doing what she sees him doing. He shows up healing, casting out demons, serving others, and when she experiences his freedom, she does the same. It is his healing touch in her life that frees her from what had kept her trapped, that fever, and enables her to live according to his example. And maybe that makes us stop and consider, what has Jesus freed us from? And what might he want us to do with that freedom? Well, later that evening, people start flocking to Jesus, looking for freedom from their own illnesses and afflictions. And it's not easy to keep good news a secret. There's a man staying just down the street at Simon's place who can make you whole again, who can make you well again. And people who value that kind of freedom are going to go and do what they can to at least have a chance to check it out. When you have something that people want, they will make an effort to find you. I remember the story of one megachurch back from its beginning, its founding days, when it was just starting out in a forefront. The couple of pastors who were trying to get this church together were sitting around thinking about how they were going to advertise. What was their signage going to look like? How are they going to attract people? How are people going to find them? And one of them came up with the utterly illogical idea that they should have no sign. They should have no name. They should be just like the trendy bars and clubs in their cities that didn't have signs and didn't have names, and you couldn't even find them. You didn't even know about them unless somebody invited you to them. They wanted to generate that same sense of mystique, that sense that you really had to want to go to this church in order to get there. And while that might have been a little bit of a gimmicky way to go about it, I think it's not all the way off base. When you have something people want, they will make the effort to find you. That was true about Jesus. At our best, it has been true about Christians too. In the early days of the church, the Acts era, and immediately after that, Christian communities were radically different from the surrounding culture. They cut across all ethnic and economic barriers. You would see Romans and Jews together. You would see men and women together. You would see officials and farmers and philosophers and soldiers and blue-collar workers all mixed together in a Christian house church, because they didn't see themselves as different. They didn't allow those things to define them. They allowed their allegiance to Jesus to define them. And so they were bound together in these shared faith communities where they cared for one another. They sold their own goods and they contributed proceeds to the overall needs of the group. The communion meal that we're going to share later in this service was something they practiced too, although when they shared it, it was a full meal. They all sat down together at a table and they ate together. People from all different walks of life became equal. They became the same. All the distinctions melted away. And this commitment to radical equality and communal care once set the church apart. It was one of the reasons that people wanted to become Christian. Not so long ago in this country's own history, the church was the driving force in education. Methodists and Lutherans and Anglicans and Catholics and Presbyterians were all responsible for establishing hundreds of colleges and universities across the nation, for promoting literacy and vocational learning among the population. Groundbreaking medical research was done in hospitals and facilities that were funded and run by Christians. Orphanages and children's homes were staffed and supported by churches and their members. Are we still doing these things? Are we still offering the world anything unique or valuable? Are we still living in visibly different ways that attract attention? There are still crowds of sick and afflicted people all around us. There are still racial and economic inequalities. There are still broken men and women wrestling with their own demons. And a lot of the time, they're not flocking to us for hope. These days, it seems they're turning to miracle drugs and stock market bubbles and internet conspiracy theories. And is that because we don't have anything to offer them? Is it because we don't have anything of value to share with them? Or is it because we've just kind of forgotten how to do it? We who are here every week, who know what's so good about the relationship we have with Jesus, sometimes seem to forget that that's not so obvious to everyone else. There are people out there who still need to hear the good news from us. And I know you're thinking, everybody I know has already heard about Jesus. They're already familiar with the cross and Christianity. And fair enough, they probably are. But have they ever seen it lived in a way that really made a difference? That really enabled them to understand what was so good about the good news? Or has it just been presented to them as a set of rules, another set of obligations, moral obligations that you have to fulfill because we said so, and you probably don't want to get on the wrong side of the big guy? If the perception is that the church is only about making your life harder without making it any better, I can understand why people aren't interested. Let's think more about how our faith is good news and how it can actually improve people's lives in the here and now. Now, back in Mark, following that evening full of healings, Jesus goes off to a deserted place to pray in the early morning. And the disciples come looking for him again, knowing that he has something they need. They report that the whole village is seeking him. And I love that little line because it's just one of the simplest and yet deepest ways that we can be countercultural. How we can do something that looks different from what everyone around us is doing and shows them that there is a different way to live. Think about your own life, the busyness of it. Think about, especially pre-COVID, how every night it seemed like could be scheduled with something going on. Every weekend was full of events, of parties, of get-togethers. Every day we went to the office and we worked ourselves to the bone. And quarantine has not been all bad from the perspective that it has forced us to slow down sometimes. Think of all the ways that people can get a hold of you. Think of all the people who might make demands on your time. Spouses, kids, bosses, teachers, parents, pets. Who knows who else wants or needs something from you. And now multiply that all by 1,000, and you start to get an idea of what it's like to be Jesus. Wherever he went, people were crowding around him. People were following him. People were pursuing him. People were delivering their prayer requests for their afflicted loved ones. But Jesus was not flustered. Busy and sought after as he always is, he has actually set aside time, right in the middle of everyone else's demands on him, to disconnect from the world and to reconnect with his Father. Make no mistake, while he is praying in that deserted place that morning, the people of Capernaum are still suffering. They're still hurting. They're still broken. They are still in need of him. And if Jesus wanted to, he could get up earlier and he could see more patients. He could probably stay up round the clock and never see the end of them. Yet his relationship with God is such a priority that he sets aside time to do this. He chooses to make time for God away from all of his pressing obligations because he knows that he can't offer wholeness to anyone else if he doesn't have it himself. Jesus' actions demonstrate to you and to me that we always have time to spend time with God. We are never too busy for God. And when we feel like we are, then maybe it's more important than ever to make time. Because the world will always be there with all of its problems. We just won't be equipped to do anything about them if we aren't drawing on the strength of the Lord. Now finally, once Jesus has had his prayer retreat, what does he do? He says to his shocked disciples, okay, pack it up. It's time to go. We're moving on. And Jesus is on the move once again. He just won't stay put. Like I said earlier, there is an urgency to his story that Mark's gospel really emphasizes. Everything happens so fast. People are always struggling to keep up, and events are over before you know it. Jesus has moved on to the next thing. Again, when you get in the car with Jesus, you just have to hold on tight for the ride. But at the same time, you have to let go. You have to let go. You can't be a backseat driver. You cannot keep Jesus' attention focused on you and your problems. Jesus is the one at the wheel. Jesus is the one setting the agenda. Jesus is the one who is in charge, and we are the ones who have to follow where he goes. You know, so often we think we know what's best for Jesus. We know what he ought to be most concerned about. And most of the time, Jesus' top priority, as we would establish it, looks suspiciously like us, doesn't it? When his disciples come looking for him that morning, and they tell him his village is crying out for help, you know, what are they really saying? They're saying, Jesus, stay here a little longer. Stay in our hometown. Stay in our comfort zone. Stay here among the people and the places we know best and care most about. But Jesus says, look, I'm sorry. I can't stay. There is a whole world out there that needs to know what we know, that needs to hear God's message. We have to let Jesus drive. We have to let Jesus drive. We want too much to be in control and to tell Jesus what to do. We assume Jesus is really just here for us, to attend to our issues. We need to be willing to let go of Jesus and recognize there are others out there who need him too. If we are the 99 faithful who stayed in the pen, then we need to let Jesus go out in search of those who are lost. We're not going to be able to stop him. And if we want that badly to be with him, then maybe the best thing for us to do would be to leave the pen as well. Follow him out into the world and take care of those who he loves and seeks and serves. Jesus is not going to stay put. He is not going to slow down. So let's stop asking him to get comfortable in here with us where it's warm and cozy. And let's learn to follow Jesus wherever he wants to take us, like true disciples. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.